So 2 Novembers ago, November of 2023, our friend Keith Penske celebrated his 60th birthday. Keith and Gina Penske are the couple that used to have two homes, one down here where they taught and one up in Traverse City where they went for the summer. They've since retired from down here and both teach at private schools up in Traverse City and just live there permanently. And that's actually where I stay when I go up for annual conference, which is much nicer than the hotel. And I even saved the church a little bit of cash, which is a good thing too. But Keith wanted us, our kind of group of college friends that get together often, to help him celebrate that birthday. It's right at the beginning of November. He asked about us coming up the first weekend of November, and I kind of cringed and I said, "That's All Saints Sunday, and I really don't want to miss that." He said, "No worries, let's do it the weekend after. Can you do that?" Sure. So second weekend of November, we were up there, and we asked Keith, "Well, what are you going to want to do now that we're all here?" And he said, "For my 60th birthday, I want to do an all-day, hit a lot of the wineries and do a winery tour." And Jen and I looked at each other, being not wine drinkers, but we were good sports, and we responded enthusiastically, "Well, of course, that'll be great. We'll have fun. We'll be with the gang, even if we don't really like wine very well." And as is often the case when you throw yourself into something as a good sport, you end up enjoying it a lot more than you thought you would. And we even found a few wines that were okay. Now, being not upper crust people, we're not really fans of anything dry. Anything dry is kind of gross and disgusting. Oh, we got a few thumbs up. All right. See, we're not alone. We did find that there were a few of the sweeter wines that we actually liked okay. I think there was a Riesling that we thought, okay, this is pretty good. Oh, I'm seeing some heads nod for that too. All right. Oh, see, I'm feeling better already. You guys are great. So we did the whole tour. Honestly, our very favorite thing, though, it was very cold and snowy and blustery. And one of the wineries actually had hot cocoa with just a nip of brandy. And that was actually our favorite of all, but you can do wine for communion, probably hot cocoa and brandy, not so much. But the same way that I'm finding out here that there are a lot of folks who are kind of in the same boat that like the sweeter, the not dry wine, I found the more I shared this story that there were lots of us ordinary folks that were kind of in the same boat. I suppose if you're a real wine aficionado, the Fraser Crane types or whatever, you maybe want the fancier wine, but give it to me cheap. I'm good. Back in the old days, it was very important that wine was, as the Isaiah scripture talked about it, well aged. The initial product was so harsh that it really did need to age for a long time for stuff to break down. Is it the tannins that have to break down in wine? Yeah. See, they didn't teach us this at seminary. This is like Google stuff here that I'm doing now. So it was important for these things to break down over a long period of time. But now the processes are such, and the number of hybrid grapes that there are, that really you're better off to drink the wine more or less fresh out of the bottle and not let it sit too long. You can tell that I had to do a little bit of Googling this week to know what I was talking about, right? I did find out too that most of the corks now that they use are synthetic, because you can never count on whether the regular cork is going to let stuff oxidize too fast or too slow. But that's a whole other ball of wax. So actually, nowadays, new wine is oftentimes better than the old wine. So why all this talk about wine? Well, it's this bit at the end of the scripture talking about you don't put new wine in old wineskins. And oftentimes how that shows up in the scripture is like, well, wait a minute, what exactly is Jesus trying to tell us with this? On a practical level, it makes sense, right? If you put the new wine that still has some fermenting to do in an old wineskin and it starts giving off gas and the old wineskin is brittle and whatever, it's likely to burst. Imagine shaking up your pop. It's not a good thing. So on a practical level, sure, you want to have new wine in new wineskins, but what is this talking about in the scripture context? Well, at first blush from nowadays, maybe we would be tempted to think, well, the new wine is Christianity and the old wine is Judaism. But then we think, now wait a minute, but Jesus and all the disciples were Jewish, so no, that can't really be what it's about. Well, what's new? Maybe it's Jesus' teachings that are new, that need new wineskins. And that certainly makes sense, right? If you think about the Sermon on the Mount and all the times that he will take the old, you have heard it said, and you say, but now I say to you, take it a step further, bump it up a notch. Your righteousness needs to exceed that of the Pharisees. Yes, when I'm thinking about the spirit of the law, in one sense it's simpler, but in the other sense it's also harder to fulfill. All right, we need new wineskins to hold this teaching. That would make sense. Like I've been telling folks in Disciple a lot lately, I'm not sure if it's true, but it'll preach. And yet, when you read the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew's Gospel, that's not where this passage about the wineskins happens. When you read both Matthew and Mark, and even in Luke, where it appears, it's not near Jesus' teaching. So what is the new wine? At least that Mark is talking about here. Maybe the right question to ask is not what is the new wine, but who is the new wine? It comes right after Jesus is called Levi/Matthew, and he's having a banquet, ostensibly at Matthew's house, ostensibly with Matthew's other friends and colleagues who are tax collectors. Maybe these are the new wine. Folks that didn't fit in under the old structures that the Pharisees are used to. Wait a minute, what is your master doing eating with tax collectors and sinners? That doesn't work. That bursts old wineskins. We've come a long ways in some ways as church of figuring out how to hold things in new wineskins. Used to be back in the day, you'd never see pastor show up without a robe, or without a suit coat at least. But here I am. I could even take my tie off and you wouldn't care. You'd be good with that. Probably wouldn't want me to take off my shirt, so I'm not going to do that. Used to be, there was probably a day when many of you wouldn't come to church unless you were dressed up. But now we have a wide diversity of folks that come any which way. We have women who are in ministry. We have all sorts of ways in which we have figured out how to welcome more and more folks into the life of the church. And yet there are still places, are there not? Who are the folks that would stretch the modern day scribes of the Pharisees? Who might wander in that we would need to trade in our old wineskins for new? And as individuals, who do we need to make sure fits in our wineskins? Do we need to trade in our old wineskins to let in folks who don't necessarily agree with us? One of the books that I'm reading right now that I think is going to be our Lenten book is called The Final Days. And one of the chapters, the author was talking about messianic expectations, what people were expecting in a Messiah. And when Jesus is asked at his trial, Are you who you say that you are? Are you the King of the Jews? Each of the Gospels, Jesus responds differently. And the author says, Jesus' different response are not a problem. They are permission. They give us permission to answer difficult questions in slightly different ways according to our perspective. And in each of those instances, each of the gospel writers is having Jesus answer in a way that emphasizes the different way in which he's looking at what being a Messiah means. For some, the expectation of a Messiah was that he would be like a new high priest. Jesus has a little different take on what that looks like. For some, people are expecting the Messiah to be a king. Jesus has a very different way of looking at that. For some, the Messiah is to be a new prophet. Jesus says, yeah, prophet, but there's a different way to look at that. What would it mean for us to turn in our old wineskins for new? The other thing that I think is important to remember is that it doesn't mean throwing out the old wine. Old wine and new wine will both fit together in new wineskins just fine. And so it is that the new wineskins are not out with the old and in with the new, out with Judaism, in with Christianity. No. It's about ever expanding our ability to welcome people into God's kingdom without rejecting anyone else. May we be, in the way that we live as a church and as individuals, new wine in new wineskins.